Okay, today what I have is a multi-tap delay called VLD, or very large delay. Now, I don't know how large a delay it is. The idea was to use multiple delays to create a really long delay. And in theory, this delay could do up to about a minute and 15 seconds of delay, which is pretty big. But the idea also came from the Very Large Array, which uses a bunch of smaller radio telescopes to make one big radio telescope. And in the same way, this uses 5 delay lines in series to create a larger multi tap delay. But the real story here is programmability. Um, so let me just play it for you because everyone gets all up in arms if they don't hear something. Multi-tap delay, doing its multi-tap thing. But again, I said the story here really is programmability. So there are 4 parameters on the front page that you can control the setting for each of the 5 taps from: time, feedback, level, and panning. And you just program them by changing these parameters around. You can adjust them as you see fit. Maybe we want might be too much feedback. Level, you can adjust everything. You could turn off taps if these are set to the leftmost position, they're off. So if you just want a 1 or 2 or 3 tap delay, you can do that. Of course, because you can still use these taps in the feedback network, you can do some interesting things where a tap is pulled for feedback but isn't heard at the output. But this is pretty familiar if you've worked with like a Strymon Volante or something like that. Panning, that sort of thing. So the idea here is just something that's quick and easy to program, um, that can allow you to do some fun, maybe complex rhythms. And you can just quickly change things around as you see fit. One parameter to be aware of is the feedback, because it's 5 delay lines feeding back into a single return. It can get a little bit out of hand. And in fact, to aid that, there is a master feedback parameter, which I've set by default at 0.5. You might want it even lower if you start pulling in more feedback from multiple taps, because it's basically 5 times the original signal being fed back if all of these are at full blast. So gain can get out of control. Let's talk about time for a second. So from left to right, time gets longer, and it begins with 30-second notes and ends with quarter notes. So 30-second, dotted 30-second, 16th, dotted 16th, 8th, dotted 8th, and then finally quarter notes, which gives you a lot of control over, the ways in which these taps rhythmically interact with one another. Sorry, I'm coming off a bit of summer COVID, so I've got sniffles and that sort of thing. There's another time option on the second page. If you press this button called time multiples, then these positions signify multiples of the clock. So 1 times the length of the clock, 2 times the length of the clock, up to 7 times the length of the clock. Now, a bug that I think has become a feature is that those changes between the two different time scales don't take effect until you reinitialize the setting. And what I mean by that is until I press any one of these buttons, they're still in the original quantized time division scale. But once I press one, let's go with this one because it's the shortest one, it will now be in the new time scale. So we hear that picking up much later. We hear these first 2 taps and then there's a delay, and because there's feedback within these, we hear them to repeat some. But we can mix and match these 2 time scales because they don't take effect until they're reinitialized. And this goes, both ways. So if I put all of these the longer setting, we're not going to hear anything for a second. All right. One thing to keep in mind is that when you change this first tap, you might have some pitch artifacts, which you might be able to hear at low levels right now. So when you're changing this one around, you might not want to do that on the fly during a performance. This very top line, because it is modulated and interpolated, which means it'll have pitch artifacts when it changes its time. So we have these long ones, but we could probably definitely heard the pitch artifact there. Still on. So we can have this mixture of very short delays and very long delays. And weird pitch artifacts. I regret this a lot, that I've been changing this around and now have this thing going on. So just quickly to get through the second page of controls, we have an LFO used for modulation. This input of this multiplier, which is called mod LFO amount, the LFO is very minutely connected to the second input, and you control the depth of modulation with this first input. And the modulation is kind of interesting because all of these delay lines are they're all temporally related to one another. They're either multiples or divisions of one another. And so the modulation is weird. I'll just... It tends to sort of flatten out because everything is sort of a phase of the original wave that's modulating the first tap. We have a tone filter. Everything passes through the tone filter, and then all of the feedback passes through the tone filter again when it regenerates. And this is a multi-filter. So right now it's set to a low pass, but you could set it to a high pass or whatever filter you want it to have this be, and then adjust it to your heart's desire. I have it sort of, in a pretty mild low pass setting so that regenerations just kind of shift under things. like I said, there's a master feedback control, and then there are dry and wet levels. The wet level I wasn't sure if I was going to include just because you have, you know, pretty minute control over the volume of the taps, but thought, hey, if you want to make a global adjustment, why not? Um, and that is the patch. You can change the tempo with by tapping this button, or by using this stomp switch, or by using MIDI clock. And yeah, that's VLD. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. It's real easy to program, which is a big part of the idea. And that's what I got for you today. Have a good day. Take care.